everyone. I'm Ron Cross, and I've called this press conference to address the media and others interested in Aboriginal affairs about the ongoing tension between the Mohawk and both the federal government and the provincial government of Quebec. On July 11th of 1990, plans were set to begin construction on the expansion of a private 9-hole golf course, the Club de Golf de Oka, to 18 holes. The mayor of Oka, Jean Ouellette, also had plans to construct 60 luxury condominiums on land that was sacred burial ground to the Mohawk people. We, the Mohawks, have been fighting for centuries to get the government to recognize this burial ground as sacred to our way of life, and to prevent any construction or developmental actions to it. However, we have been ignored constantly, as if it doesn't matter, and the land is only another spot to develop. So upon hearing that the plans were set to go ahead, we took matters into our own hands and protested against it, placing a barricade at the entrance to the land. Our elders specifically told us not to use our weapons unless we were attacked first. So when the Sûreté de Québec, which was the provincial police force, had set off tear gas and flashbangs, we opened fire in defense. Unfortunately, Corporal Marcel Lemay was shot and killed. We wanted to keep our protests as peaceful as possible, but unfortunately violent force had to be used. We surrendered to the RCMP and the Canadian military when the conflict was beginning to escalate far too quickly and in a much more violent manner than we had wanted. The federal government had purchased the land rights and are now preventing any construction or development from happening on this land. With the construction at a halt, we can at least find some peace knowing that our land is safe from any developmental threats.
What were your feelings upon finding out that the construction was scheduled to go ahead?
I was beyond furious. How could the government ignore our pleas for recognition for so long and still have the audacity to proceed and build not only an 18-hole golf course, but also 60 luxury condominiums on our sacred burial grounds? The ignorance that has been shown to my people is absolutely disgusting. The government clearly had no intentions of listening to our statements unless we stood up and did something that would make them listen.
Do you think you went a little too far in terms of fighting back? An officer was shot and killed. There are many protests in the barricade.
Like I previously stated, our intentions were never to fight back in a violent manner. The only reasons we had opened fire was because the police had thrown tear gas and threw flashbangs in hope of using the confusion to push us back. So we stood our ground and opened fire. Unfortunately, an officer was shot and killed. Our protests were held in a peaceful manner, and the roadblock was a statement to the mayor and people that we weren't just going to sit back and allow them to disgrace our sacred land. We were going to continue to push back, and we're not going to let them do as they wished.
When the confrontation was beginning to heat up, who intervened, and how did you react, and how did others from the Mohawk react?
When the conflict between the Mohawk and provincial police force, Sûreté de Québec, began to heat up, the provincial government had sent in the RCMP to break things up, and Robert Bourassa, who was the Premier of Quebec, also requested the support of 2,500 men of the armed forces to help subdue our efforts to fight back. We as a group were quite upset the government was ignoring our plea to claim that land that our people had been living on for hundreds of years. Aboriginals from all over Canada sympathized with us, and many people recognized our valiant efforts to secure our land. Some, however, especially the locals that were affected by the protests, the roadblock, and the gunfire, thought our efforts were nothing but nonsense and threw stones at us, and were angered by our efforts.
Are there still any hard feelings over the events that occurred in the summer of 1990?
Of course, there are still some hard feelings over the events that occurred. I mean, just because the government purchases the land and prevents any further development from occurring doesn't mean that we forget the whole incident entirely. The way the matter was handled was extremely poor. Had the government dealt with it in a timelier and just manner, the violence might not have escalated to the point of someone losing his or her life. The continued acts of ignorance to our people are something that will never be forgotten, but by showing some efforts to repay us by purchasing our land and preventing any development from happening does help keep our tempers down.
The famous image of you facing off with an officer of the military is one of the most significant symbols of this event. Why did you stand up like that?
I walked up to the officer because I wanted to show that we weren't going to back down. I had hoped that by doing this it would show the military and people across the nation that this was no small matter to us, and that when it comes to something as significant as sacred land and lives, we would do anything to protect it. Thank you, everybody, for listening.